Cons of Reddit. What's the most terrifying thing you saw inside of prison? Part 2. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. A white kid get absolutely destroyed for accidentally sitting on the front bench of the TV area on his second day. They waited for rec, then started walking with him. Every lap they made more guys would tag along. Then once in the blind spot they jumped him. 6 to 7 guys beating a 120-pound skinny little white kid. They were climbing up the fence and jumping down on his head. He was out within the first few seconds, but they kept on beating him until the COs gassed everyone. They snapped his lower back and he is now in a wheelchair. All for not knowing any better. The worst thing I've ever heard was a grown man being raped one night. He refused to pay a protection fee and 3 dudes raped him. They stabbed him in the ass with a toothbrush shank. I've seen some crazy shit, but theirs were the most memorable. Sometimes I have nightmares about the rape. I've never heard anything like that ever since. Okay, so unfortunately, my bunk was close to the corner where everybody came to fight or whatever. So this one guy claimed that he was a gang member, but it was discovered that he was a false flagger. So, the gang members put him in the corner and took turns beating and raping him. He was in the infirmary for about a week. When he came back, the gang got him all over again. He was transferred after that. I promise there aren't many things more terrifying than hearing a grown man scream while he's being raped. Inmates being denied medical treatment until they are dead. I saw it twice. Both were diabetics, both elderly, neither had family support, and both had conditions exacerbated by the inhumane housing situation. In South Texas heat, they lock up 56 men per dorm in poorly ventilated metal buildings. On lockdown they require you to stay in your bunk on a plastic mattress for weeks, only allowed a 5-minute shower every 3rd day. I was 40 and in decent shape and I thought I might die there. In the afternoons the wall next to me was so hot I couldn't leave my hand on it. Shame on TDCJ and all of the employees. They put people in a terrible situation and we allow it to continue. If they treated dogs like that there would be pitchforks. End of rant. I was held without bail in county jail for 2 weeks. We get to watch TV during rec. We were watching the news one day, and this guy was arrested for killing a judge's brother by stabbing. He was a mean-looking skinhead with neck and face tats. Next day, he's now in my cell block looking extremely on edge. Turns out, the guy he killed sexually assaulted a female member of his family. Although set to get a prison sentence, he killed for his family's honor. I work in jails across the country. There are many unsettling moments. Violence between inmates, suicide, psychosis. I remember trying to teach a nurse one day and an inmate kept screaming at me, "Put your eyeballs back in your head, bitch." THEYRE rolling around on the floor. But the moment that sticks out by far for me, one day I was helping a doctor. When she's helping her patients I try and stay out of the room so that way I'm not interfering with her work. For some reason the specific patient that she was working with head stuck out in my mind before. Though I see hundreds a day during MedPass, where I follow a nurse from cell to cell, I specifically remember seeing this man. He was relatively young and very polite, which is what stuck out at me. He always said, "Hello ma'am, how are you, thank you, please," etc. I remember looking at the chart to see what his name was. I rarely remember names, I actually feel it is better not to. Anyways, I'm standing in the hallway outside the doctor's office, when another patient who is sitting on the bench waiting to be seen says to me, "Stay away from that ______, he's a crazy MF." I laughed, BC it is one inmate telling me to stay away from another inmate. I don't even let anybody stand behind me or within 5 feet of me. My laughing changed his tone, he got a lot more serious, his voice raised in intensity. "No, I am serious. Stay away from that MF, he is crazy." Okay, point taken. I nod my head and in that moment and thankful for the COVID masks that hide my reaction. Not a moment later, the corrections officer comes waltzing down the hallway swinging his keys in his hand and whistling. "Oh, hey, that's body bag lag." Name slightly changed for privacy, my eyes immediately widened. I googled him later. That man had a GF. She got pregnant. She didn't let him see the baby when it was born. He wanted custody. He and his mom, dad, brother, planned and successfully executed all 10 of her family members, anyone who could possibly get the baby before he would receive custody. And maybe I'm misremembering, but I think it worked. I believe he had custody of the kid for a while until he himself came forward and confessed and threw his whole family under the bus and accepted his punishment. I think he became super religious, or maybe the guilt got to him. I remember his cell always had 100 crosses taped to the walls. I've had scarier moments in jail. Whole cells having to go on lockdown because they see a girl working. Lot of people jerk off at you. But body bag lag will always stick out to me. I was inside a female prison, so my perspective is a little different. For one, all prisons are different. From county level to state and federal. I was in state for most of my time. A couple things were pretty terrifying. For one, the amount of sex between guards and inmates was ridiculous. It was consensual in that they both said yes, but it can never really be consensual when it's a guard and inmate. The power difference is just too much. You couldn't really say no either. It's not that the guards would retaliate, it's that they wouldn't protect you when another inmate or group of inmates attacked you. The really creepy thing in mine was the pedophile lady. She was a lifer. No one actually messed with her because it seemed like the guards were on her side, for reasons we suspected. She was also really friendly to new inmates. Particularly younger-looking petite inmates. For reasons you can imagine. They were owned by her if they let them. Like a small gang in jail. They all had the same prison tattoo. Which I didn't realize till I was in the shower with a couple of them. As an attorney, I saw a guy who had been a serial killer targeting teen girls. He was asking for help with his sentence. He was sentenced to life in solitary, an obviously illegal sentence that isn't and wasn't being enforced. But even the most dedicated non-profit defense attorneys I've ever met refused to help him. They sure as fuck didn't tell that to his face though. This guy was fucking huge, like pro wrestler type shape, white, clean cut, handsome, relaxed, and personable, but inside he was a subhuman monster. A raper and killer of young girls. His soulless eyes are some of the scariest things I've ever seen. If you saw him on the street, he'd look perfectly healthy, normal, unless you looked in his eyes. They were crazed and empty. Like his whole face was saying, "Hey, how's it going?" And his eyes were howling and screeching incoherent, panicked nonsense. Not an ex-con, but a former CO. I've got some stories. Guy once stopped taking his psych meds. We were alerted by medical minutes before he shoved a pencil through his cellie's eye over an open ramen packet. Luckily for the cellie, the pencil went in between the eyeball and the socket and didn't do any real damage. Hell of a way to get woken up from a nap though. On the non-physical side of things, I found kiddie porn in a Chomo cell during a routine search. He had it mixed in with nude photos of adult women, which is how my brain clicked to what I was looking at. The kiddie photos were cutouts from children's dance and gymnastics catalogs, as well as ads from magazines that showed young girls in bathing suits. They were such innocent photos, and I feel like that somehow makes it worse. When we couldn't get him removed from the tier, as punishment or for his own safety, we didn't care which. My sergeant broke protocol and flat threatened dude with exposure if we found anything like that in his cell again. Pretty tame compared to what I've been reading, but I was in a juvenile correctional center, not juvie, think long-term sentences for juveniles, where a buddy of mine was on a unit that was short-staffed, so he had to be on the sex offender unit. While he was there, he told me that the pedophiles would joke on each other that, "Your victim was 7 years old." "Oh yeah? Your victim was 4 years old." "Yeah, well you still masturbate to your victim." At least I didn't rape my brother. Needless to say, he was horrified. When I was in primary school, P7, a prostitute got murdered across from the school. Tracy Wild. It ended up a cold case 20-odd years later. I share a cell with some Asian dude, Chinese to be exact. Dude had fast food restaurants, kids, nice house, the lot. He had a fight with a friend and got DNA took, and turns out he murdered said hooker. Small world when I think about the chances of that happening. Seen people who injected heroin and done it wrong and now have big holes in their legs. Seen slashing people jumping of balconies. I saw a guy get attacked by a dog for taking a banana out of the dining hall. CO told the guy to stop, and something in the inmate's movements triggered this dog and it attacked him. As he screamed for help, the unit manager piled on him and put an elbow in his neck as he bled on the stairs. This was at a minimum security camp where there shouldn't have been a dog in the first place. 90% of these inmates were alcoholics or drug dealers. And this particular inmate was already on medication that made him pretty drowsy and out of it all the time, and as the result of this encounter they sent him to the hole, upped his dosage to where he couldn't remember his name or where he was, and slapped him with an assault charge for struggling against the unit manager while he was pinned and being mauled. And it all conveniently happened in a blind spot of the prison where the cameras don't reach. I think about this every day. I met some pretty fucked up people while I was in, and the worst of them were the ones running the place. Not my story, but rather a guy the first know who was a CO. Said an inmate decided it would be funny to shit in his cell and then spread it all over himself and the cell so the guards would have to clean him and the cell up. Imagine his surprise when they just didn't. Also didn't let him out for like a week, so he just sat in there, covered in shit, surrounded by everything covered in shit. Every single other inmate within sniffing distance absolutely livid because the entire place reeks of shit. Not a con, but I was a CO for a year before I got out of that job. Pretty much we had an inmate who broke his tablet, don't know if it was on purpose or accident, and decided to throw it in the trash and claim he never got one. So we go through all the trash and find the tablet and ask him whether he broke it or not. It should have been an easy fix, honestly. The guy would get written up and probably sanctioned for a week or two, but he'd get a new one. Instead he swears that the tablet isn't his, he didn't break it and he wants a working tablet. Thing is, we take accountability of almost all items we issue to inmates, so we know it's his. While trying to get the guy to just admit what he did, he decides he'd rather stab himself in the stomach instead. I've seen people get shot and had bullets flying over my head, but that is by far the craziest, wildest shit I've ever seen. Between instances like that and seeing way too many former friends or acquaintances as inmates at my facility, I decided that it wasn't the job for me. Got a few stories myself, but the one that I'll always remember is one told by my mate's dad. He had a cellmate who was a big burly farmer type guy and was serving time for killing his wife and her lover. My mate's dad says one night while they were sleeping, the guy jumps out of his bunk screaming at the top of his lungs. He was having nightmares about the situation and couldn't get out of his head what happened that day. The guy walked in on his wife in bed with another man. Farmer guy pulls out his shotgun and blasts the lover first. When he got his senses together, he saw his wife running towards him, so he accidentally shoots her head off. His nightmare was his wife still walking towards him with no head. One guy was telling how he murdered a guy who stole from him, and after he killed he found the shit that he thought the other guy stole. Another guy sitting in the room listening to the story also started to laugh, and the one telling the story turned around and said to the guy laughing his head off, "WTF are you laughing about? You had 2 persons in your freezer. Did you have frozen pizza in there too?" And the whole room bursted out in laughter, including myself, as the situation was so surrealistic. Also saw a guy who had hanged himself in his room, and the normal looks of pedophiles that could be anyone freaked me out. If you want to know how a criminal looks like, take a look in the mirror. It could be anyone. That is scary. I had a coworker who was a prison guard for John Wayne Gacy, killer clown. Apparently he was normally a very calm, nicely mannered inmate. But one day she is alone with him in his cell going over some paperwork regarding his sentence, and he just looked over at her with these dark shark eyes and said, "How many times do you think I could stab you with this pen before the other guards got here?" She said it was the most uncomfortable she had ever been in her entire life, and this woman worked in the max security section of a Chicago prison for 20 years. How depending on what you're in for, you could be screwed immediately. When I went in, people immediately checked my papers aggressively. The second they saw I was in for a short stay misdemeanor, everyone relaxed and told me that they're sorry they got me on bullshit and to not worry and that I'll be out soon. We all just waited and talked till we got our uniforms. Then we were all in solitary except for 5 minutes out of the day for a phone call. The worst part was being in that box alone with my thoughts for days. No books or TV or anything. Never want to do that shit again. My father was in prison in South Africa for 12 years. He spent a lot of time with the worst people all around the world. He is from Liverpool, England. He speaks and reads perfect English, therefore he read the letters written in English of his fellow convicts. The story that really sticks with me is, there was an Albanian man who was banged up for locking club bouncers in a dog kennel and setting them on fire. He used to fight off all the prison guards. A real nut job. He asked my father to read his letter. In brief, the letter was from his government saying he will never be released from this prison and he will never be seen as a civilian again. My dad is a lovely person and I will never reveal anything about his sentence, but nevertheless, he told this crazy man that the letter was just from his family saying how much they loved him and hoped he was okay. The man was made up and left my father alone. But my dad knew deep down how he would have reacted if he told him the truth. This doesn't really belong here, and will probably get buried by now, but it's an interesting, yet sad story nonetheless. A family friend worked as a CO in a couple different prisons in Southern California. He once told me that one of the saddest things he saw was that for a lot of inmates, they don't realize what their true talents or gifts or passions are until they're behind bars, when it's too late. He has seen inmates who were amazing artists, as good as Disney animators. He saw inmates in the electronics shop that were so gifted, they could have easily been electrical engineers, mathematicians, or at least electricians. It came so easy to them. He saw inmates in the wood shop who were gifted woodworkers. He's seen inmates who could easily have been chemists, writers, mechanics, teachers, chefs, barbers, tattoo artists, personal trainers, and on and on and on. A lot of these guys should have been productive members of society, but got dealt a bad hand at the start of their lives, and just went down the wrong path because they had a bad upbringing. He said the wasted potential was just heartbreaking. This is gonna take some explaining, so sorry. It's on the long side. I was in a medium and low risk facility in NY State for women for almost a year. Medium and low risk means the crimes of the women typically aren't violent or something most would consider a heinous and serious crime. There is a maximum security prison in Bedford Hills for those types of offenses. But if, say, you committed murder and after a while of being in the facility you never got into trouble, as in never got a ticket by officer, weren't involved in fights, weren't caught with contraband, did you assign duties, kept your room area clean and a bunch of other things to be a good inmate, eventually you would have your status lowered and could be transferred to a lower risk facility. It also works the other way around, whereas in you get into fights, are caught with drugs, cheeking meds, or put in lock or shoe a lot, you will face the possibility of being sent to Bedford. While I was there, it was at the height of the COVID epidemic and the facility went from having about 1,000 females to less than 400. They were sending everyone home that they could, which also meant some leeway and guidelines changed concerning the evaluation of inmates' so-called risk level. So some girls from Bedford were transferred to the lower risk facilities that wouldn't have met the criteria to do so before the pandemic. This was, I'm sure, done in an effort to consolidate costs to the state. Anyways, on Tuesdays you get the new girls, either first entering the system for the first time or the transfers. One dorm in particular, the J dorm, received a massive influx of transfers in a relatively quick period. In every dorm there is a box, like a plastic utility box or toolbox with a lock on it next to the officer's desk, which contains the cleaning chemicals for the dorm, and with COVID the facility was being extremely serious about the cleaning regimens of each dorm to prevent illness and such. This box is supposed to always be locked and you need the officer to unlock it as it contains bleach and other chemicals. But it typically isn't, as you have girls who have jobs during different periods of the day and it's mandatory to do chores in the dorm you're assigned, or you will be ticketed and face disciplinary actions, or just want to clean their rooms, and so it was usually a pain in the ass to the officers to have to unlock and lock it back up multiple times. In the dorms we also had hot plates to cook on. I don't know what circumstances led to this fight, but two of the girls from Bedford ended up taking a spray bottle of bleach and boiled it on the burners, while most of the other women of the dorm had jobs during midday or classes. I want to say there was around 10 of us there at the time. I was on the phone with my boyfriend and could smell the odor even though they were right next to the open window boiling it, but no one was saying anything to them or asking what they were doing, and I didn't know it was bleach at the time. As I'm on the phone I see the two girls constantly looking over their shoulders towards the glass window with the officer at his desk at the other side, until one girl goes to the TV room, which is a separate room but you can see into because it's surrounded in windows. She returns to the other girl at the burner, and the girl from the TV room gets up and walks into the dorm area where all the rooms are, and a few minutes later walks out with a fourth girl, and they go into the bathroom, while the two girls who had been at the burner dump the liquid into a bowl. I was still on the phone and I watched them walk into the bathroom. Then there's a lot of yelling and swearing, and I tell my boyfriend something bad is about to happen, and then I hear the most horrible sound I didn't think was possible ring out, and a splash hit the tile floor of the bathroom. I realized then that they just threw a boiling liquid on this girl. The officer comes running out and the rest of us in the dorm stop everything we were doing. TV is shut off. I hang up my phone call and we hear the struggle of the officer and these other women. Within a few minutes dozens of other officers rush in and the rest of us are put on count, where we are all sent to our rooms and must remain there. The injured girl screamed and screamed and it was horrifying. I was shaking and you would have thought she was dying. I didn't sleep right for weeks and I can still hear her when I think of this. The two who attacked her and the one who led her in there were immediately put in shoe and were charged, and the injured girl was brought to a hospital outside of the facility. This was the most horrible thing I ever witnessed in my time in prison, and it's something that will haunt me forever. On a random note, I also did time with Anna Sorokin, aka Anna Delvey. I have friends and family that have done hard time in the US federal prison system. What few stories they've told have always communicated a very subtle, nuanced fact which is, to me, more terrifying than much of what I'm reading in this thread. There are people in this world who are truly pure evil. They revel in acts of extreme ruthlessness, violence, and sadism. They are far, far beyond any hope of rehabilitation or reform, and are, according to these criminals I know so well, cut from a very different cloth than the rest of us. They come from all manners of ethnicity, creed, cultural background, and socio-economic status. There is a huge difference between the ex-cons I know and these men. According to the anecdotes, they are few and far apart. But they are there. This is what's always scared me most about prison, being in close confines with these things. Asterisk. This will probably be buried, and it's technically my aunt's story, but when she was in prison her roommate was very mentally ill. They don't really have good systems set up to help, so this woman was unmedicated. She said she woke up one night to some wet eating sound. She looked and saw her roommate with her arm cut open, pulling out and eating fat from her arm. She called for help and they took her to med and stitched her up. Then they put her back in the room after a few days. She again woke up to the noise because she had ripped open her stitches and done it again. I don't know what happened after that, but when she told me I was mortified, whereas my aunt just said it was kinda gross and laughed it off. I was a trustee, which was an inmate worker. I got to basically go outside daily and do work for the city that I was jailed in. It had a bunch of perks, and a majority of the time, the city would employ inmates once they finish their sentence. So, getting out of county jail and getting $15 an hour minimum was pretty cool. I moved back home a few hours away after that, though. But the perks were great. Extra food, more lax TV, living stuff, and even Mario Kart. I served time in 2 jails, and this one was very much an everyone versus the system compared to people versus guards, each other, etc. Anyway, another duty of trustees was suicide watch. Imagine that, inmates had to watch over other inmates. Well, one night I was woken up and told that I'm being assigned suicide watch. Normally, we had to write stuff down as to what they were doing every 5 minutes. This one was every minute. They brought in someone who had overdosed, put him on the floor in the cell, wrapped 3 mattresses and told me to call them if he started seizing. Yeah, in about 10 minutes his body was shaking all over the place, coughing up blood. This was also in the same spot where inmates were in solitary confinement, and even then, they got less food and privileges. It was fucked up in the first place to put them there, but to take away meal portions was even shittier. It took about an hour for them to actually come in and take him to the hospital. Never heard about it since. I got the full shift credit and went back to sleep. This was years ago. I still think about it. When I was going to college at West Virginia University, I got arrested for underage alcohol possession and was sent to Doddridge County Jail. Lol. I was put in a holding cell with a bunch of guys. Toward the end of my stint there was a kid maybe in his early 20s who told me he was in for a coke deal gone bad. The purchaser tried to run without paying. He calmly told me that he ran over the poor bastard with his car and wasn't sure if he was dead. Told me he had a great future ahead, was on a rugby team, had money and girls, and now he could be looking at life in jail. Before he was there I was going stir crazy, pacing around and making all the people around me annoyed, but hearing his story made me feel better in a weird way. When I was in prison in Ga, someone tried to stab me over a single ramen soup, $1.30, I owed to his gang member friend who went to the hole. Walking through the hallways and seeing the metal ripped out of the HVAC vents, for shanks, is a pretty scary feeling. Seeing your next cell over neighbor get busted with 60+ shanks in his cell is not reassuring either. The list could go on and on. Honestly, everything about prison is terrifying and ultimately destroys your soul and strips you of any hope of a normal life.